The morning started quietly in the small town on the edge of the state. The sun was barely up and the streets were calm, lined with dew and the soft hum of early birds. The man at the center of this story had just stepped out of his small brick house, wearing a worn jacket and holding a cup of coffee that had long since cooled. His loyal dog followed close behind, wagging its tail, eager to start the day. To anyone watching, they looked like an ordinary pair, a man and his dog taking a short walk before work. The man's calm eyes scanned the street, his posture relaxed, his movements deliberate. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that hinted at the life he once lived, a life most people couldn't imagine. He had served his country in silence for years, part of a unit that didn't exist on paper. He had been trained to handle chaos, to stay composed when others panicked. But those days were long behind him now. What he wanted most was peace. A quiet life away from noise, headlines, and conflict. His dog was his peace. The two had been through everything together. That animal had helped him through sleepless nights, through memories that wouldn't fade, through the quiet ache of being unseen after giving everything. On this particular morning, nothing seemed unusual. The man was walking along the sidewalk, letting his dog stop to sniff patches of grass. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, and the sound of its tires on the pavement broke the calm. The man didn't think much of it. He'd seen patrol cars pass by before. The neighborhood was quiet but not perfect. There had been reports of break-ins lately. It was normal for officers to circle around. But today things didn't go as they usually did. The cruiser came to a stop a few houses down. Two officers stepped out, both appearing alert and cautious. The man noticed them but didn't pay much attention. His dog, curious as always, tilted its head toward the newcomers but stayed close. The officers seemed to be looking for something. One spoke into his radio, his eyes moving across the street as if scanning for a suspect. The man thought they might be responding to one of those neighborhood calls. Maybe someone had reported a suspicious person. He took a sip of his coffee and started to turn back toward his house. That was when one of the officers raised his hand. "Sir, could you stop for a second?" The officer called out. The man paused, a bit confused but polite. "Sure," he said calmly. His dog wagged its tail, still by his side. The officer began walking toward him, the other following close behind. Their movements were sharp, their expressions tight. Something about their tone felt off, but the man stayed composed. He'd been trained to read people, to sense tension before it broke the surface, and he could feel it now. "Is there a problem?" he asked, setting his cup down on the low brick wall beside him. "Someone called in about a man walking with a large dog," the officer said. Said the dog looked aggressive. The man frowned slightly, surprised but patient. "Aggressive? He's not aggressive. He's just walking. He's never hurt anyone." The officer's partner kept his hand near his hip where his duty belt rested. The man noticed but said nothing. He gave a small smile, trying to ease whatever unease hung in the air. "I get it," he said softly. "People get nervous when they see a big dog. But he's gentle. He wouldn't hurt a thing." The first officer nodded but didn't seem fully convinced. "Can you keep him close?" he asked. "He's already close," the man replied. The dog sat obediently, tail brushing the sidewalk, looking up with soft eyes. For a few seconds it seemed like things would settle. The man expected them to realize there was no problem and move on. But one of the officers suddenly received a call on his radio. Static crackled, followed by a voice saying something too muffled for the man to understand. The officer's face changed slightly. His eyes narrowed. "Can I see some ID?" he asked abruptly. The man hesitated. "Sure," he said slowly, reaching into his pocket. His movements were calm, deliberate, respectful, the way he'd been trained to move when every motion could be misread. But the dog, sensing the tension, let out a low, uncertain sound. Not a growl, not a threat. Just confusion. The officer's hand twitched. "It's okay," the man said gently, turning his head slightly toward the dog. "Easy, boy. Everything's okay." The officer stepped closer, his partner just behind him. The air was suddenly heavy, thick with misunderstanding. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains drawn by the sight of uniforms and the low murmur of voices. The man handed over his ID, and the officer looked it over, still tense. He read the name, glanced at the address, then back at the man. Something about the way the man stood, calm, grounded, unafraid, seemed to bother him. It didn't fit what he expected. The second officer spoke up. "What do you do for a living?" "Used to serve," the man replied simply. "Just work from home now. Military?" "Something like that," he said with a faint smile. "A long time ago." The officers exchanged a look. They didn't know what to make of him. To them, he was just a quiet man with a big dog, a dog someone had mistaken for a threat. But the man's stillness, his steady gaze, made them uneasy. They were used to people fumbling with words, showing nervousness around authority. He showed none. The dog shifted slightly, brushing against the man's leg. The man gave a small pat on its head, a silent cue to stay calm. The dog obeyed, tail lowering. A car drove by, breaking the moment for a second. The man took a breath, hoping the tension would ease. But instead, one of the officers suddenly stepped back and said something under his breath. The man couldn't hear, but he saw the small movement, the kind of shift that meant fear had just taken over reason. The dog noticed it too. The ears perked, body tense. The man whispered again, "Stay, boy. It's all right, but the world often moves faster than words." The misunderstanding deepened. The tone, the distance, the way the officers' hands hovered near their belts. Everything started spiraling, even though nothing dangerous had happened. The man could feel it. That familiar rush, and not of fear but of instinct. The same instinct that once kept him alive in places where mistakes were fatal. But now he wasn't a soldier. He was just a man trying to protect his home and his companion. He opened his mouth to say something, to explain, to calm them. But one of the officers spoke first, voice sharp. "Sir, keep that dog under control." "He is under control," the man replied, his voice still calm but firmer now. "He's sitting right here. Look at him." The officer's eyes darted to the dog, who sat obediently beside his owner. The only movement was the slow wag of its tail. Neighbors were now stepping out onto porches, whispering among themselves. The man could feel eyes on him, but all he cared about was ending this before it turned into something it didn't need to be. "Listen," he said quietly, taking a small step forward. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. You got a call, I get it. But you can see he's calm." "I'm calm. Let's not—" The officer's radio crackled again, louder this time, cutting him off. Another message came through, short but tense. The man couldn't hear what it said, but whatever it was seemed to confirm something in the officers' minds. Something wrong. They stiffened. One of them muttered, "That's him, maybe," under his breath. "That's who?" The man asked, confused. "Sir, step back," the officer ordered. "For what reason?" The man asked, his tone still even, but there was an edge now. Not aggression, just disbelief. "I've done nothing wrong." "Step back," the officer repeated, this time louder. The dog stood up, sensing the rise in volume. Its tail stopped wagging. It moved a half step forward, not out of anger, but instinct. The need to protect its human. The man immediately put out his hand. "No," he said softly. "Stay." The animal froze, still and alert, eyes flicking between the man and the officers. For a moment it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. And then, the air filled with misunderstanding, again not in action, but in the way people look at each other when fear gets ahead of truth. The man realized then that this wasn't just about a dog. It was about perception, about who he was and how they saw him. He could see it in their faces. They didn't see a calm, disciplined man walking his pet. They saw a potential threat, something that didn't belong in the quiet street they patrolled. And he knew from experience that when fear speaks first, reason takes too long to catch up. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "I'm not your problem. I'm just trying to go home," but the tension didn't lift. The officers still looked uncertain, one whispering something to the other. The dog shifted again, restless, feeling the unease. The man reached down to rest his hand on the dog's back, a steady touch to remind it that everything was fine. "Please," he said softly. "Let's just relax. You can check whatever you need to check. I'll wait right here." One of the officers glanced down at his tablet, typing something in, likely running the man's ID. The other kept his eyes locked on the dog. Seconds passed like minutes. The man stood still, silent, thinking of how strange it was that peace could feel so fragile, that something as simple as a morning walk could turn into this. Finally, the officer looking at the tablet frowned. "Your record's clean," he muttered. "Of course it is," the man said, almost with a smile. But still, the unease didn't fade. They didn't know that the man standing before them had once worn a uniform too. A different kind, one that carried no name tag, one that served in places too distant for news cameras. They didn't know he had once been trained not just to fight but to observe, to read, to predict. They didn't know that his calm wasn't defiance, it was discipline. To them, he was just a man who didn't seem scared enough. And in their world, that sometimes made people more suspicious. The man glanced down at his dog again. "Let's go home," he murmured quietly, taking a slow step back. The dog turned, obedient, ready to follow. The officers hesitated but didn't stop him. The street was silent again except for the distant hum of the morning traffic. As he walked away, the man didn't look back. But something in the air told him this wasn't over. Something about the way they had looked at him, not curious, not cautious, but uncertain, told him that this simple misunderstanding might come back around. He didn't want trouble. He never did. He had already lived through enough of it. All he wanted was quiet mornings and long walks with the one friend who never judged him. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Because the moment he reached his gate and placed his hand on the latch, a voice behind him called out again, the same officer, sharp and uncertain. "Sir, wait." He froze. The dog turned, ears perked. And in that stillness, the peace he'd been building for years began to tremble. The man stopped when he heard the officer's voice call out again. The sound was sharp, but there was a trace of hesitation in it, as if the officer wasn't sure whether to follow through. He turned slowly, one hand resting lightly on the gate, the other hanging by his side. His dog looked up at him, unsure of what was happening. Its tail gave a small, slow wag as if waiting for a cue. The morning was still quiet, but the air felt heavier now, like the kind of silence that holds too many questions. "Yes, officer," the man said calmly. The two officers were still near their car. One of them had stepped forward again, holding the man's ID. "Can you wait a second?" he asked, his tone softer than before, but still uncertain. The man nodded. "Sure." He turned fully to face them, his expression calm, patient. He had spent years in situations far worse than this, but something about being misunderstood in his own neighborhood hit differently. The first officer approached again, his steps slow. "We just need to clear something up," he said. "No problem," the man replied. The dog sat back down beside him, obedient, quiet. The man gave it a small pat on the head. He didn't want the officers to see tension, not even a hint of it. He knew how small misunderstandings could grow if fear was in the air. After a moment, the officer looked up from the ID. "We got another message from dispatch," he said. "Apparently there was a break-in nearby early this morning. They said the suspect had a dog. Just need to double-check, that's all." The man raised his eyebrows slightly, a trace of disbelief crossing his face. "You think that's me?" "No, sir, we just have to confirm," the officer replied quickly, as if trying not to sound accusatory. The man sighed softly, nodding. "All right, do what you have to do." He could see the nervousness in their movements. They weren't bad men, he thought. Just cautious and perhaps a little too ready to assume. The world had made them that way. People saw what they were afraid of before they saw the truth. While they checked the information again, he stood quietly by the gate. The wind picked up slightly, moving the leaves across the street. A few neighbors had stepped outside now, pretending to check mailboxes or sweep their porches, but really just watching. He felt exposed, though not for the first time. He'd been watched before, but in other countries, under far different skies. But this time it felt strange. It was his own street, his own home, and still, eyes followed him as if he didn't belong. One of the officers spoke into his radio again, giving the man's details. Static answered. Then after a moment, a voice replied with confirmation that didn't quite reach the man's ears. He just waited calm, eyes on the ground. Finally, the officer lowered the radio and said, "All right, looks like you're clear." The man gave a small smile, polite, but tired. "Glad to hear it." There was a short pause. The tension began to fade, though not completely. The first officer looked a little embarrassed now. "Sorry about that," he said. "We've just been getting calls all morning." "You understand?" "I do," the man said simply. "You've got a job to do." The officers nodded. The one who had been more silent before stepped forward slightly, as if wanting to say something but unsure how. "That's a good-looking dog you've got there," he finally said, trying to lighten the mood. The man's expression softened a little. "Yeah," he said quietly. He's been with me a long time. The officer smiled faintly. What's his name? The man looked down at the animal, his eyes warm. Buddy, he said. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of its name, and its tail wagged again, slow and gentle. The officer nodded. Seems well trained. He is, the man replied. He's been with me through more than most people ever will. There was something in his tone, a depth that made the officers exchange a glance, though they didn't press. They couldn't have known how true that was. The conversation seemed to ease now, the earlier tension dissolving into a more human space. The man could almost feel normal again. Almost. Well, the first officer said, stepping back toward the cruiser. Sorry again for the trouble. You're free to go about your morning. No problem, the man said, picking up his coffee cup from the wall where he'd left it. The officers walked back toward their car, one of them speaking softly into the radio again. The man turned, opening the gate, and walked into his small front yard. His dog followed closely, tail wagging as if it already knew the mood was lighter. He knelt down, resting a hand on the dog's back. Good boy, he said softly. You did well. The dog licked his hand once, eyes full of trust. The man smiled, a real smile this time, the first of the day. He walked up to the porch, the wooden boards creaking slightly under his boots. Inside the house, the faint smell of breakfast from earlier lingered. The man set his coffee down on the counter and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet return. But peace has a way of never lasting long when fate decides otherwise. Barely 15 minutes had passed before he heard the sound of a car pulling up again outside. He looked out the window, expecting maybe a delivery truck or a neighbor. But it was the same police cruiser. The man frowned. Again? He muttered under his breath. He stepped out onto the porch, his dog right beside him. The two officers were back, and this time they weren't alone. A second vehicle had pulled up behind them. Another officer, the older with a sharp gaze, stepped out. The man stayed where he was, calm but alert. Something wrong? He called out. The first officer looked uncomfortable. Sir, can we talk to you for a moment? You already did, the man said quietly. You said I was clear. Yes, sir, but there's been a new update, the second officer said, his voice firm. We just need to confirm some details about your background. My background? The man repeated, his tone steady. Yes, the officer said, stepping closer. Our system flagged a record. Military service, classified details. We just want to verify that. The man exhaled slowly. I didn't know that was a problem. It's not, the officer replied quickly, though his tone betrayed a mix of curiosity and unease. Just standard procedure when something doesn't show full information. The man nodded once. All right, but you won't find much. Most of my record isn't public. That caught their attention. The older officer narrowed his eyes slightly. Not public? The man gave a faint, almost tired smile. That's how it works when you serve in certain places. There was a pause. The younger officer from earlier glanced at his partner, then back at the man. Can you tell us what kind of service that was? No, the man said softly. And it wouldn't matter if I did. It's behind me now. The older officer studied him for a moment longer. Something about the man's tone, the quiet authority in his posture, made it clear he wasn't bluffing. The way he stood, balanced, aware but calm, was the kind of presence that only came from someone who had been trained for things few others could understand. Understood, the older officer finally said. Just doing our job. I know, the man replied. For a moment there was quiet again. Even the wind seemed to pause. The dog sat beside the man, perfectly still, eyes watching the officers but body relaxed. The older officer looked down at the animal. That's quite the companion you've got there, he said, his voice softening. Yeah, the man said with a small smile. He's saved my life more times than I can count. There was honesty in his voice, quiet, sincere, the kind that didn't need proving. The officer gave a slow nod. You seem like a man who's seen a lot. I've seen enough, the man replied. The conversation hung in the air a bit longer, balanced between respect and misunderstanding. The officer seemed unsure whether to press further or leave it alone. Finally, the older one nodded. All right, sir. Sorry again for the inconvenience. We'll clear it up. Appreciate that, the man said. They turned back toward their cars. The man stayed on the porch watching as they drove away. Only when the last car disappeared did he finally relax. He looked down at his dog, who was now lying on the porch boards, tail tapping softly. "We're fine," he said gently. "Let's go inside." They went in, and for a few moments the house felt like a safe world again. The man sat by the window with a fresh cup of coffee, the dog curled up by his feet. He stared outside, thoughtful. He wasn't angry, not really. Just tired of being seen through the wrong lens. He had spent years doing work that few would ever understand, giving his all for a country that sometimes forgot people like him existed once the battles ended. He'd come home hoping for peace. But peace, he was learning, wasn't always about silence. Sometimes it was about patience, about waiting for the world to see you as you truly were. As the morning passed into afternoon, the man's phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend from his old unit, one of the few who still checked in. The message was simple. "Heard about a mix-up in your town. You good?" The man smiled slightly and typed back, "All good. Just another day." But deep down he knew this was more than just a small misunderstanding. Something told him that word had already started to spread, not just among officers but beyond. His quiet life might not stay quiet for long. He stood up, stretched, and poured another cup of coffee. The dog lifted its head and looked up at him. "Guess we'll take another walk later," he said softly. "No trouble this time, huh?" The dog wagged its tail as if promising to behave. The man chuckled lightly. "Good boy." Outside, the sky was turning pale gold, the kind of light that makes everything look peaceful. But somewhere beneath that calm, the man could feel a shift, small, subtle, but real. People were talking. Files were being checked. Questions were being asked. And though he didn't know it yet, this quiet day was only the beginning of something far larger, something that would soon draw attention to who he really was, and what he had once been trained to do. For now, though, he sat back, took a sip of coffee, and listened to the soft breathing of his best friend, the one creature who never judged, never questioned, and never doubted his worth. And as the sun dipped lower, he whispered to himself, "Let's just keep it peaceful." But fate, as always, had its own plan. The next morning came quietly, with soft light slipping through the blinds. The man woke early, as he always did. It was a habit he could never quite break, no matter how long it had been since his days of early calls and silent missions. He sat up slowly, stretched, and looked down to find his dog already awake, watching him with those steady eyes. The animal's tail thumped lightly against the floor. "Morning," the man said with a faint smile. The dog tilted its head as if to say, "Ready when you are." He made coffee, the smell filling the small kitchen. It was a simple ritual, but one that grounded him. Outside, the world was calm again, or at least looked that way. The same quiet street, the same mailboxes, the same slow hum of life. But he could feel it, that small shift in the air. Ever since the encounter with the officers the day before, something had changed. Not in him, but around him. The way a few neighbors had looked at him later that evening. The way 2 patrol cars passed by more than once that night, driving slower than usual. He didn't blame anyone. People talked. It was human nature. Someone had probably said something to someone else, and now curiosity had turned into whispers. He sipped his coffee and watched the morning unfold outside his window. His dog sat by the door, waiting for their usual walk. "All right," the man said finally, setting down his cup. "Let's go, buddy." The leash clicked softly as he attached it, though the dog hardly needed it. They'd been walking together for years, and the leash was more for other people's comfort than his own. As they walked down the familiar path, the man noticed a few faces watching him, people who normally waved, now pretending to check their phones or sweep their driveways. He gave a polite nod anyway. He wasn't angry. He just felt a quiet sadness. It was strange how fast peace could shift to suspicion. Halfway through the walk, a car slowed beside them. The window rolled down and a familiar face appeared, one of the officers from the day before. "Morning, sir," the officer said. The man stopped, his dog standing calmly beside him. "Morning. Didn't mean to bother you," the officer said. "Just wanted to check in. Everything all right after yesterday?" "Everything's fine," the man said simply. The officer nodded, though he looked uncertain. "We had to file a report on the stop, standard procedure. I mentioned that you were cooperative. Hopefully that's the end of it." The man gave a small smile. "Appreciate that." There was a short pause. The officer seemed to want to say more but didn't know how. Finally, he said, You've got quite a reputation now. Word got around that you used to be part of something special." The man sighed softly. "People like to make stories out of things they don't understand." The officer chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, that's true. Anyway, have a good morning." "You too," the man said. Giving a polite nod, the car rolled on, leaving behind a faint smell of exhaust and a quiet that felt heavier than before. The man kept walking, though now his thoughts were turning. He knew what it meant when his past started being talked about again. He had worked hard to keep it buried, not because he was ashamed, but because peace only survived in silence. By the time he got home, the mail truck had arrived. There was an envelope waiting for him, plain and unmarked. He recognized the kind and official but discreet. No return address. He opened it slowly. Inside was a short note and a small card. The note read, "We've been trying to reach you. Contact the office when you can." He stared at it for a moment. The handwriting was familiar, not the person but the style. Precise, military, someone from the old days. He set it down, ran a hand through his hair, and let out a quiet breath. "So it begins," he murmured. The dog, sensing his change in mood, came to sit beside him. "Nothing to worry about," he said softly, patting the dog's head. "They probably just want to check in." It's been years, but deep down he wasn't sure. It wasn't common for people from his past life to reach out unless there was a reason. The rest of the day moved slowly. He tried to go about his usual routine, fixing things around the house, feeding his dog, doing small chores. But his thoughts kept drifting back to that note. By evening, he decided to make the call. He found the old number in a worn notebook, one he hadn't touched in years. The line connected after a few rings. "Office," a voice answered, crisp and professional. "This is—" He paused for a moment, then gave his name. There was a short silence on the other end, followed by a change in tone. "1 moment, sir." He waited. The seconds stretched. Then another voice came on the line, one he hadn't heard in a long time. "Well," the voice said with a small laugh. "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again." "Didn't think you'd still have my number," the man replied. "Some numbers don't get erased," the voice said. "We got word you had a run-in with local law enforcement." "Wasn't much of a run-in," the man said evenly. "Just a misunderstanding." Still, it caught attention, the voice continued. Your name lit up a few old files. "You know how these things work? People start asking questions." "I haven't done anything wrong," the man said. "I know that," the voice replied quickly, "but we thought you should know. When attention turns your way, it can stir things up." The man leaned back, his jaw tightening slightly. "I'm not part of that world anymore. I understand. But that world doesn't always forget its own," the voice said. "If anyone reaches out, anyone, you call me first. Don't trust anyone else." The man didn't answer for a few seconds. Then he said quietly, "Got it." "Good," the voice said. "Stay safe. And keep that dog close. You'll know why soon enough." The line went dead. He sat there for a moment, phone still in his hand, staring at nothing. The words echoed in his head. "You'll know why soon enough." He looked down at his dog, who had settled at his feet again. "Seems like life isn't done with us yet," he said softly. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind drifted back to old memories. Dusty roads, foreign skies, the sound of his own heartbeat in the dark. He had worked hard to leave those images behind, but sometimes the past found its way back in small, quiet steps. When he finally did fall asleep, he dreamed of being back in uniform, not in a battle, but in a briefing room, surrounded by faces he hadn't seen in years. He couldn't remember what they were saying, but he remembered the feeling, the weight of responsibility, the awareness that every decision mattered. He woke before dawn, heart pounding softly in his chest. The dog stirred beside the bed and looked up at him, eyes full of quiet concern. "I'm okay," he whispered, reaching down to pat its head. "Just an old dream." He sat by the window as the sky lightened. He thought about calling the number again, but decided against it. There was no point digging deeper unless he had to. Instead, he focused on the day ahead. When the sun rose, he went outside to water the plants. Across the street, a neighbor waved, the first in 2 days. That small gesture felt like a breath of relief. Maybe things were calming down after all. But around noon, another car appeared. This time not a police cruiser, but a dark sedan with tinted windows. It parked across the street, unmoving. The man noticed it but pretended not to. He went back inside, closing the door softly. He didn't panic. He just waited. For hours the car stayed there. No one got out. No one knocked. Eventually, as the sun began to lower, it drove off. The man watched it disappear at the corner, then sat down at his table with a quiet sigh. "Looks like someone's watching again," he murmured. His dog came and rested its head on his leg, sensing the unease. He scratched behind its ears. "Don't worry. We'll be fine. Always have been." That evening he took another walk, shorter this time. The air was cool, the sky painted orange. The world looked peaceful again, even if he knew better. He passed a few neighbors who greeted him with hesitant smiles. He greeted them back as if everything was normal. By the time he returned home, the stars had begun to show. He unlocked his front door, stepped inside, and felt a strange calm settle over him. Whatever was coming, he decided, he would face it the same way he faced everything else, quietly, patiently, and with strength that didn't need to be seen to be real. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down in his favorite chair, and looked at his dog lying by the door. "You know," he said softly, "all I wanted was peace, but maybe peace is something you have to keep earning." The dog's tail tapped lightly against the floor as if in agreement. The man smiled faintly, his eyes thoughtful. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't run. He'd been through storms before. This time he would simply stand his ground. And as the night settled over the quiet street, he whispered the same words he always said before sleep, a habit from another life, a promise to himself. Stay calm. Stay ready. The dog's eyes closed, trusting completely. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. The town slept. But somewhere, far away, someone was already asking questions about the man who had once belonged to a world that didn't exist on paper. And though he didn't know it yet, the next day would bring a knock at his door, one that would change everything. The next morning was quiet again, too quiet. The man woke before sunrise, as he always did. The sky outside was still gray, the air cool and still. His dog stirred at the sound of his footsteps, lifting its head and wagging its tail softly. "Morning," the man said in a low voice, the kind of voice that filled the silence without disturbing it. He poured himself some coffee and stood by the window. The same view, the same calm street, yet something about it felt different now. He couldn't shake the feeling that the peace he loved so much had cracks running through it. He glanced at the small stack of papers on his table. The note from the mysterious letter was still there, along with a few old documents he had pulled out the night before. He had tried not to think about the call, but it lingered in his mind. He'd spent years learning to stay unseen, to keep his life quiet, but now it seemed the world had found him again. As the morning light grew, he stepped outside with his dog. The sky had turned soft pink and a gentle breeze moved through the trees. His dog walked close beside him, every step in rhythm with his own. He liked the stillness of mornings like this. No noise, no rush, just the sound of footsteps and wind. But halfway down the street he noticed something odd. A dark sedan, the same kind from the day before, was parked at the corner again. The windows were tinted, and though the engine was off, he could sense that someone was inside. He didn't stare. He didn't need to. Years of training had taught him how to notice without reacting. He simply turned at the next block and continued walking. "Come on," he said quietly to his dog. "Let's take the long way." They walked for nearly an hour. When they finally returned home, the car was gone. The man didn't say a word. He just went inside and closed the door. He sat at the table thinking. Whoever was watching wasn't from the local police. He could tell. Their silence said more than their presence. Later that morning, his phone rang. It wasn't a number he recognized, but he answered anyway. "Good morning," a voice said. "This is Officer Lane from the county office. I just wanted to check if you're available for a quick visit today." The man hesitated. "A visit?" "Yes, sir. Nothing serious. Just a few follow-up questions regarding the report from earlier this week." He glanced at the clock. "You can come by at noon." "Thank you, sir," the voice said before hanging up. The man set the phone down slowly. He didn't like unplanned visits. They often came with hidden questions. By noon, the same officer from the first encounter arrived, this time alone. He looked nervous, as if he'd rather be anywhere else. "Thanks for your time," the officer said politely. No problem, the man replied, gesturing toward a chair on the porch. You can sit. The officer sat down, removing his cap. I wanted to clear something up. The other day, when we ran your information, something strange came up. A note on your record said, "Do not question. Clearance level 9. We don't see that often." The man said nothing. He simply waited. So, the officer continued carefully, I wanted to ask if there's anything you'd like us to know. Just so there's no confusion in the future. The man smiled faintly. There's nothing you need to worry about. That note's from another life. I understand, the officer said. I just want to make sure you're treated fairly. Sometimes when something like that shows up, people start making assumptions. I've noticed, the man said softly. The officer nodded. If it helps, I told the department there's no issue here. You've been respectful and calm. I think they'll let it go. Thank you, the man said sincerely. The officer hesitated before standing. You know, he said, I looked up a few things. You were part of something big, weren't you? The man's eyes stayed on the horizon. It doesn't matter now. The officer studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. All right. I won't ask more. Have a good day, sir. You too, the man replied. When the officer left, the man leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. He had expected the questions, but hearing the phrase clearance level 9 again brought back memories he had tried to bury. That designation wasn't ordinary. It meant he had been trusted with missions that didn't exist on paper, the kind that never made it to the news, the kind people forgot on purpose. He thought about calling the number from the old note again, but decided to wait. Drawing attention never helped. Instead, he focused on simple things: fixing a loose fence board, trimming the small garden, cooking lunch. He tried to live in the moment the way he'd promised himself years ago. But in the afternoon, as he sat by the window, he saw something that made his stomach tighten. The same dark sedan. Back again, this time parked right across from his driveway. He sighed quietly. Whoever it was, they weren't hiding anymore. His dog stood near the door, ears perked. The man stroked its head. Stay calm, he whispered. Just stay calm. For nearly 20 minutes, the car didn't move. Then finally, the door opened. A woman stepped out, dressed in plain clothes, carrying a small folder. She walked toward his gate and stopped a few feet away. Sir, she called out gently, can I speak with you for a moment? He studied her carefully. Depends who's asking. She opened the folder slightly, just enough to show a badge, but not a police badge. It was darker, simpler, with no department name. I'm with a federal division, she said calmly. We're following up on a matter that might involve you. I haven't done anything, he said evenly. I know, she replied. We're not here about that. It's about your record, and something connected to your service history. The man's jaw tightened slightly. That history's closed, she nodded. It was supposed to be, but something was recently declassified and your name appeared in a few of those files. He didn't answer right away. So what do you want from me? Just cooperation, she said softly. Nothing more. He crossed his arms, standing firm. Cooperation with what, exactly? Your old unit, she replied. They're trying to locate a few people who may be at risk. It seems one of your old missions is being investigated again. He blinked slowly, processing her words. Why now? Because someone else is asking questions about it, she said. Someone outside the government? The man frowned. You're saying someone's looking for me? Not just you, she said. But you're on the list. The air between them felt heavy. For years he had been invisible, a ghost in plain sight. Now it seemed that invisibility had worn off. Look, the woman said gently. We're not here to expose anything. We just want to make sure you're safe. Things are changing fast, and some of the old records weren't meant to see daylight. He studied her expression, trying to read the truth. She didn't look like she was lying. Still, trust was not something he gave easily. I'll think about it, he said finally. She nodded. That's fair. Here's my card. She placed it on the edge of the fence post and turned to leave. One more thing, she said over her shoulder. If anyone else contacts you, anyone claiming to know you from the past, don't engage. Let us know first. He didn't respond. He just watched as she walked back to her car and drove away. After she left, he picked up the card. It had only a first name and a number. No agency name, no title. Just a number. He set it on the kitchen counter, staring at it for a long time. Then he looked at his dog. What do you think? He asked softly. We call or wait? The dog tilted its head as if sensing the uncertainty. Yeah, the man said with a sigh. We wait. The rest of the day passed slowly. The car didn't return. No one called. But the peace didn't feel real anymore. It felt like standing still in the middle of a quiet storm. That night he sat outside on the porch with his dog beside him. The stars were bright, the air cool. He thought about his past and the missions, the faces, the promises. So many of them had faded over time. But one thing hadn't. His instinct to stay ready. He knew what this meant. If someone from the outside was digging into classified missions, it could bring danger, not just to him, but to others who had once stood beside him. He couldn't